The Prime Minister is reiterating his support for the Commissioner of the RCMP today after one senator called for her resignation. But Justin Trudeau acknowledged the RCMP has work to do. Take a listen.
Systemic racism is something that touches every corner of our country, every corner of our institutions, and requires people to understand and move forward in coordinated ways with partners. The Commissioner is committed to doing that alongside members of our government. We will do that together and work with Indigenous communities.
It was yesterday that Senator Lillian Dick said Commissioner Brenda Lucki should step down after Lucki said she struggled with the term systemic racism. Later, the Commissioner said it does exist in the RCMP. In recent weeks, there have been multiple incidents between police and Indigenous people, including 2 deaths. In the last 9 days, police in New Brunswick have shot and killed 2 Indigenous people, 26-year-old Chantal Moore, who police were doing a wellness check on, and 48-year-old Rodney Levi, when RCMP were responding to what they say was a call about an unwanted person near a home last Friday. Senator Murray Sinclair designated Canada's treatment of Indigenous peoples as cultural genocide in the Truth and Reconciliation report. He went on to find overt and systemic racism in the treatment of Indigenous people by Thunder Bay's police force in 2018. Senator Sinclair joins us now from Winnipeg. Hi, Senator. Good to see you. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you, Vassie. Thank you for having me.
You wrote on Facebook following the Commissioner's original comments, systemic discrimination is unconscious and institutionalized. It's about a system's rules, procedures, and practices. Get rid of the racists and you will still have a racist system. Do you accept the Commissioner's comments a few days later that she now says systemic racism does exist in the RCMP?
Oh, yes. I don't doubt that for a moment. I haven't doubted that since I was a young lawyer practicing law. I said pretty much the same thing back in 1972 when I was just out of law school.
I should rephrase my question, I guess. Do you accept? Do you think the Commissioner should be in the position she's in now that she has made that admission, or do you agree with Senator Dick that she should be removed from her position?
I've never really believed that it was necessary to fire people in order to make a point. So she has my support in order to stay in the position and continue the good work that I know that she's trying to do. And I don't know her personally. I hear good things about her, and I think she's a well conditioned and prepared person for that particular position, except for the fact that, like all leaders, I think she needs to examine the way that she's been educated and the way that she's been trained in order to understand what it is that she doesn't know, and is obviously the extent to which racism exists and how it manifests itself is one of those areas. And now she's committed to working on that, and I would, for one, volunteer to help her.
What would you tell her?
Well, I would tell her the first thing that we do is we examine the way the RCMP does its work, goes about its training, and what it does when it recruits officers. Because those are the key elements of how systemic discrimination manifests itself. The way that standards are set for achievement in the force, not only in terms of gaining entry, but also in terms of getting promotion and becoming senior officials and managers within the force, generally are layered over with systemic beliefs about people generally, and about Indigenous people specifically, and about Black people too, in terms of what they want, how they behave, what they think of you, what their standards of behavior are, and therefore what you need to do in order to police them.
You had mentioned a few days ago the idea of screening, and you touched on it there for a second. To screen basically people as they enter, I'm guessing, the force for those beliefs. Why do you think that would be effective, and how?
Well, in 1990, when I was the co-commissioner for the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry of Manitoba, we examined the question of whether it was possible to conduct psychological testing of recruits in order to determine whether they had inherent racist beliefs or unknown or unidentified racist beliefs, either overtly or unconsciously. And we were told by the psychological experts at the time that there was no such test that existed, and they didn't think they could develop one. Since then, one has been, or a number of them have been developed, and I think it's now much easier for psychologists to develop appropriate questionnaires and appropriate ways of assessing the way that we determine who are best able to exercise their functions as police officers, and to examine the way that they've been educated and to examine the way that they behave towards others and understand the law and understand their role within society. And I think that now we need to begin to utilize those skills and those techniques because one of the problems that we now face is that the way that the system has been behaving for so long is that we've created a culture of policing that has racism built within it, and people aren't even recognizing that.
I guess that leads me to my next question, and in part and parcel with what you just talked about, sort of the psychological test, the screening, that would point to the ability for there to be reform from within. Many people have highlighted the argument or put forth the argument that that can't happen, that instead, this idea of defunding the police, for example, has to take place. Where do you fall on that spectrum? Do you think that reform from within the RCMP is possible?
I think reform within the RCMP is necessary. I don't think it's the only way in which the RCMP can be reformed, though. I think that outside experts and outside expertise needs to be involved, and in particular, monitoring the rate at which and the direction in which change is occurring is also important. Defunding is an issue that I'll tell you quite frankly, I don't quite understand what people are talking about when they talk about defunding. In some conversations that I've heard, people are talking about taking all the money away from policing and devoting it exclusively to social organizations. And I don't understand how that could work, because we still need some kind of a law enforcement mechanism. And they're also talking about taking away the demands that are placed upon police forces to do what amounts to social welfare or social care work. And I tend to think that that's probably a good idea, but at the same time, police officers, no matter how much you take that role away from them, are always going to be coming into contact with people who have social and medical and addiction needs that they're going to have to handle, and they have to learn how to handle them, and they have to be because they're the first ones of contact, they have to be armed with the tools necessary to deal with them properly.
Before I let you go, Senator Sinclair, I wanted to get your assessment of, and I acknowledge that obviously this kind of change has to be instigated from all aspects or all corners of society, but your level of faith that this federal government will will drive that kind of necessary change, given, for example, the promise to follow through on on all of the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation. A report, I think the latest report I saw, 10 are completed, 24 haven't been started, and 60 there is some progress on. The Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Inquiry, I was supposed to see a plan of action, but that's been delayed because of COVID-19. What is your level of faith that this government will push forward with the kind of change you described?
I don't have much faith in governments generally to do what reports tell them to do. I've written 3 reports, and the governments have not done a lot to implement them. I was advisor to the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, and that report has not been carried out. I followed closely the work of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry, and I see the public reaction to that report. So relying upon government to actually implement the report is a huge mistake. I think what we really need to talk about is what is society doing about it? What are the elements of society that need to change and need to work on change actually doing? And reports should always be written with that in mind. We did that with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, and I've often said that there is more change going on outside of government than there is within government, and that's the best kind of change that we can see. So we see changes in the education system, We see changes in the relationship between communities. We see changes in the relationship within communities. And so I think in the long term, that's going to have the most beneficial result.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Senator, a real pleasure to have you back on the program.
Thank you, Bessie. It was good to talk to you again.
Thank you. Senator Marie Sinclair came to us from Winnipeg. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.